From across the globe, from the centre of aerospace, and now to you.
Thank you for downloading the Aero Society podcast from the Royal Aeronautical Society.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you are around the world, and welcome to this Royal Aeronautical Society Heathrow Branch webinar. Also, it's the 32nd Sholto Douglas Named Lecture. My name is William Lee, and I'm the Honorary Secretary of the RAeS Heathrow Branch and the moderator for today's session. Today joining me is Dr. Anna Pedras, the Vice Chair of the RAeS Heathrow Branch, who will be hosting today's webinar. Also with us is our speaker today, Mr. Jonathon Counsell, the Group Head of Sustainability of the International Airlines Group, and he is also the President of the branch. I'm very glad to see that while handling your registration, I have seen so many familiar names joining today's webinar, but also many new registrations from around the world. I hope you all continue to stay well and healthy. Before I hand over to Anna, I would like to remind you that if you require a CPD certificate of attendance, please use the Q&A panel to inform us your name. Throughout the webinar, you can also use the Q&A panel to raise any questions that you have for either the presenter or the moderator. You can also interact with us by clicking the like button next to each question asked. This will help us to understand the popularity of each question and prioritize them during the Q&A session. Finally, I would like to make you aware that today's session will be recorded and made available via our podcast and YouTube channel post-event. Without further ado, let me hand over the full plate to Anna.
Thank you, William. My name is Anna Pedras, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Heathrow Branch of the Royal Aeronautical Society. And on my day job, I am a University Lecturer of Sustainability. So I'm especially pleased to welcome Jonathon Counsell as our guest speaker in what is probably the most important lecture in the Heathrow Branch calendar. Jonathon is the Head of Sustainability of International Airlines Group. So welcome, Jonathon, and welcome all of you who are joining us in our first live webinar at the Heathrow Branch. We're all really excited to be here. And on behalf of the Heathrow Branch, particularly a welcome back to all our branch members. The annual Sholto Douglas Lecture takes airlines and transport management at its theme and has been supported in our branch by many major names in aviation since 1980s. William Sholto Douglas was a Marshal of the Royal Air Force and one of the great names of both civil and military aviation. He was a much-decorated fighter pilot, a civil aviation pioneer, a wartime leader of the Royal Air Force, and finally, an impressive chairman of the British European Airways, BEA, when our Heathrow branch was established in 1980. During those years, he built BEA from a very small, faltering company flying just second-hand wartime aircraft with a very limited network into an international, profitable airline. And the Sholto Douglas BAE was at the forefront of the technical innovation, most notably pioneering blind landing. Within the Heathrow branch, we host an annual lecture in honor of Douglas as to celebrate his many contributions to the world of aviation and to ensure that we preserve the legacy that he left behind. Our speaker today, Jonathon Counsell, is a most worthy Sholto Douglas lecturer. So let me introduce you our speaker. As I said, Jonathon is the Group Head of Sustainability for the International Airlines Group since July 2015. So he has responsibility for the group sustainability strategy across the group's 5 airlines. So Aer Lingus, British Airways, Iberia, Level and Vueling. Jonathon was also appointed the chair of the International Airline Transport Association Environment Committee in 2015. And in June 2017, he was re-elected as chair. In 2013, Jonathon took over the chair of Sustainability Aviation, the leading UK aviation industry consortium of airlines, airports, manufacturers, and UK Air Traffic Control Authority, driving improvements in the sustainability performance of the sector. Jonathon was previously British Airways Head of Environment, appointed in December 2007, with responsibility for developing and implementing BA's strategy on all issues relating to the environment, including climate change, air quality, noise, and waste. Prior to working to British Airways, Jonathon worked in a number of positions in the airline industry, most recently as General Manager Strategy at Air New Zealand, which included responsibility for developing the airline's network and alliance strategy. Jonathon is a graduate in mechanical engineering from Imperial College and has an MBA from INSEAD in France. Jonathon is a fellow of the Royal Aeronautical Society, a board member of the Green by Design Partnership, and most important, we are extremely privileged to know that he is actually our president. He is the president of the Heathrow branch at the Royal Aeronautical Society. So we are delighted to have him here today, and please welcome me, help me and join me in welcome Jonathon.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much, Anna and William, for that very warm introduction. And I'm very pleased and privileged indeed to be able to give this 30-second Sholto Douglas lecture. So over the next 45 minutes, what I plan to do is give you an overview of our sustainability strategy at IAG. And from the outset, I am very pleased to say that, despite the very challenging times that we face with COVID-19, that we remain fully committed to our climate change commitments, which I'll outline over the next 45 minutes. So let me start off, and it's no surprise to everybody that over the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen increasing pressures on organisations and countries in relation to climate change, as this diagram indicates, and it's from all areas. So consumers, from regulators, investors, banks, activism, particularly here in the UK. Over the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen an significant increase in activism with Extinction Rebellion. So it's very important that that we address this issue. And I'm happy to say that in the airline industry, this is something that we've focused on for at least the last 10 years. And the overall message, and I hope that's something I'll be able to portray in the next 45 minutes, that flying is okay. It's not flying that's the enemy, it's carbon that's the enemy. And we can demonstrate that there is a sustainable growth path for aviation. And the start point for all of that is real measurable commitment. So I'll focus a bit on that in the first part of this presentation. So it's committing to those targets to help avoid the worst effects of climate change. And this is an industry challenge, so it's important that all sectors of the aviation industry participate in trying to address this very important issue. As I say, something we started looking at over 10 years ago now, back in 2008, through our industry association IATA, we established these 3 targets. So first off, a 1.5% improvement in our carbon efficiency. And then, I guess more challengingly, is to look at absolute carbon reduction targets. So the midterm target was carbon neutral growth from 2020, which I'll talk a bit now that we're in that year, of course. And then the longer term target, which was driven by the UN science at the time, a 50% reduction in net emissions by 2050 over 2005 levels. And at IAG, we have always taken this issue seriously. We've had an environment department here at British Airways since the 1980s. So we've always recognised this as an issue. But in 2015, we recognised that we were in a unique position to be able to help the industry on sustainability, not least through our track record. We had a leadership team that recognised the importance of the issue, and we also, in the UK and Europe, we have a regulatory and political environment that can help us with trying to address this challenge. And that's why in 2019, last year, after about a year of internal discussions and negotiations, we were the first airline globally to commit to a new target of net zero emissions by 2050. And that was essentially based on the latest science at the time, which came out of the United Nations IPCC report of October 2015, saying that to avoid the worst effects of climate change, we now need to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. In fact, we were very surprised actually at the very positive response we got to that. So pretty much every major newspaper in the world covered the story, and also a lot of TV media and so on. So that was very good news. But one of the particularly pleasing aspects of that was that a lot of the employees across the group indicated and expressed how pleased they were to work for an organisation that takes climate change so seriously. And then just putting these targets in context of the industry targets. So as I say, we've had these 3 industry targets since 2008. So where we've gone over and above those industry targets is with that longer term target, net zero emissions by 2050. And by making that announcement, we were hoping that a number of airlines were followed. And I'm happy to say that since then, at least half a dozen major airlines globally have followed and also committed to net zero emissions by 2050. But we recognise 2050, it's 30 years away. We do need to consider some interim targets, which is why, as part of that announcement, we established a 2025 target and a 2030 target. So first off, the 2025 target, it was a continuation of our carbon efficiency improvement, so 10% reduction in CO2 emissions per passenger kilometre, which I'll talk a little bit in more detail in the next slide. And then 2030, an interim, a midterm target, if you like, it's a 20% reduction in net CO2. And again, I'll explain that in more detail in a moment. So if we go first to that efficiency target, just to provide some context, back in 2005, British Airways carbon efficiency then was 111 grams of CO2 per passenger kilometre. So you can see that we have come quite a long way since then. This is essentially driven by our new fleet. So new aircraft are typically between 20 and 40% more efficient than the aircraft they replace. And we've had targets, as I say, since 2005 to make sure that we're continually improving this efficiency. And so back in 2019, in fact, the latest numbers there, we actually over-delivered on that 90.6 and we came in at 87.8. And our target to 2025 is 80 grams of CO2 per passenger kilometre. And we are, despite the current challenges that we face in the industry, very confident that we can deliver to that target. And that will essentially, as I say, be driven by the new fleet programme that we have across the business. Now, it's interesting to reflect on that measure, grams of CO2 per passenger kilometre. And we chose that because it's becoming the industry standard for understanding carbon efficiency. But when you compare it to vehicles, the average vehicle carbon efficiency in the UK is about 130 grams of CO2 per passenger kilometre. So you can see that flying is actually more efficient than driving, which is something that surprises a lot of people. So that's always a point of interest. But let me move to the midterm target, and this is where we actually, rather than just talking about efficiency, we're really focusing on actual tons of CO2. And so one of the criticism we get as an industry is, yes, but efficiency is all well and good, but still your total tons of CO2 are still increasing on an ever upward trajectory. And what we want to demonstrate here is that no, actually our emissions are going down. And so this chart shows that the gross emissions for IAG in 2020, well, if we say 2019, accepting 2020 as an exceptional year, we're about 30 million tonnes. But our net emissions are about 27 million tonnes. And that's based on being a participant in the EU emissions trading scheme. So we buy about 3 million tonnes a year in 2019 of allowances, which have resulted in a carbon reduction somewhere within the EU economy. Now, as we progress through to 2030, we can see the role that new fleet will continue to play. But importantly, these market-based measures, which will be a combination of the EU emissions trading scheme and also the global scheme that we are now part of, the CORSIA, the carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation, which means we can go from a net emissions of about 27 million tonnes in 2019 to 22 million tonnes in 2030. So we were actually seeing now we're on a downward trajectory in terms of our net emissions, which I think is a really important message to convey as an industry, that actually our emissions are under control. And then finally, this is the chart that we have produced demonstrating how we'll achieve that longer term target to 2050. So you can see the very important contribution that will continue through new technology, that dark blue piece at the top of the chart. And then from 2035, we expect some of those new technologies to come into play, such as hybrid electric aircraft and hydrogen aircraft. A very important role placed by sustainable aviation fuels. So about 30% of all fuels by 2050 we expect to be on sustainable aviation fuels. And then finally, a significant role for these market-based measures. Now, while in this earlier period we expect that to be a combination of the EU emissions trading scheme and CORSIA, as we get closer to 2050, we expect that to be more carbon removal technologies, so things like carbon capture and storage and direct air carbon capture. So we expect that as that top technology develops, we'll be migrating to using more of that technology. So what I want to do now is just sort of outline some of the specific activities that we're looking at to help us deliver those carbon reductions. And if I start off with the operations, so we have a dedicated fuel efficiency, carbon efficiency team here at IAG, and we have upwards of 100 individual projects that we're running to reduce our carbon emissions. So things like reduced engine taxi here at Heathrow. So we have a very high proportion of our flights, both taxi out and taxi in, that are now on reduced engine taxi. Removal of flight manuals. So we now have electronic flight bag on our aircraft. That alone saves over 2,000 tons of carbon per year. Lighter weight seats. We're now able to access better technology that enables us to exploit higher winds for tailwinds and avoid headwinds. And also wingtip technology, which across the industry has reduced CO2 by over 80 million tons since they were introduced. So a whole range of activities that we continue to exploit to reduce our operational carbon efficiencies. But one of the other big areas that we look at is airspace modernisation. So this is a time-elapsed picture of the UK airspace on the busiest day. Many of you will have seen this chart, but it just shows you how much activity is taking place. But the important piece from an efficiency point of view is how much stacking there is in this picture. So that's those sort of lozenge-shaped stacks. So they're the 4 stacks for Heathrow Airport. So there is a significant opportunity to reduce CO2 by moving to best practice airspace modernisation. Across Europe, we believe that there's something like 18 million tons of CO2 that we could save each year through moving to best practice airspace modernisation through the Single European Skies project. And also in the UK, you know, NATS are leading the charge here, and we're very strong supporters as well. The need to modernise the airspace here in the UK. So here in this, you can see those stacks and how much sort of wasted their flying there is with this aircraft flying around in circles as they enter the hole towards Heathrow. So this is a big opportunity. So I say 18 million tons a year across Europe, about 10% of all our CO2 emissions, just by moving to best practice ATC. And then market-based measures. We don't have I don't have any really excuse me, I have to go back. Great pictures for market-based measures. It's difficult to on EU emissions trading scheme and CORSIA, but I'll just talk to those. But just for interest, this is an aircraft we have landing at city airports. This is one of our A318s. But yeah, on market-based measures, so I say we're part of the EU emissions trading scheme that covers our intra-European flights. About 40% of all emissions in intra-Europe are covered by that scheme, and that will increase over the next 10 years. And then for all our growth in international flights, we're part of CORSIA. So from next year, we will start offsetting all of our growth in emissions on our international flights. So as you saw in both those charts, that will play a significant role in helping us reduce our carbon emissions and meet our targets. The other area that we're very focused on is sustainable fuels. So we've been very focused for the last 10 years on the opportunity that sustainable aviation fuels will play. It has been a long journey for the industry, and this chart basically shows that the very low level of take-up of sustainable aviation fuels in the earlier years, but that we are starting to see an uptake, a growth in uptake in terms of those volumes of fuels. But it's suffice to say that is still, as a proportion of the total, very low, but we are at least starting to see movement, and you can see the volumes there. And technically, these have all been well proven. Over 200 commercial flights have been undertaken on sustainable aviation fuels since 2011. And in the UK, we're part of a consortium called Sustainable Aviation, and our latest roadmap, this is available on the website, the Sustainable Aviation website. We launched this back in February this year, and by 2035, we believe that there could be 14 sustainable aviation plants in the UK, meeting 8% of our needs, with significant economic benefit and jobs, additional jobs here in the UK. And by 2050, as I say, up to 30% of our fuels, aviation fuel, could be on using these fuels. And we recognise, even with these great new technologies like electric, hybrid electric aircraft or hydrogen-powered aircraft, those technologies will likely only suffice for short haul, narrow-body aircrafts. So the only real solution for making long-haul flying sustainable is these sustainable aviation fuels. With British Airways, our flagship project is with our partners Shell and Velocis. This is a fly-through of the plant that we're looking to build here in the UK. So we have a site on Humberside at Immingham, just on the South Humberside there. So we have planning permission for that site. And this picture shows that essentially what we're looking at building is a mini refinery. And what this plant does, it takes 500,000 tonnes of just regular household waste that would otherwise go to landfill, and through a two-stage conversion process, it converts that waste into jet fuel. So it's a double win story in effect, because not only are we creating sustainable jet fuel, we're also reducing a waste problem here in the UK. So here in the UK, we currently send almost 15 million tonnes of waste to landfill. So this helps reduce that problem as well. So back to the long-term targets. So as say IAG, we set our target back in October last year. So and the intention there was that other bodies would follow. So very happy that the UK consortium that I previously mentioned, Sustainable Aviation, announced in February of this year to also commit to net zero emissions by 2050. So the first, if you like, industry association to make that commitment. And out of that, very happy to announce that the UK government, one of the policy asks that we were looking for out of that sustainable aviation was we need a government body to help us implement policy to support our decarbonisation needs and help us do that more quickly. So the UK government launched this Jet Zero Council, and it's hosted by CEOs of all the major aviation companies in the UK, and with quite an ambitious target of a zero emission aircraft capable of transatlantic flight by 2040. But importantly, the priorities there, sustainable aviation fuels and these other technologies. So we expect this to significantly help us get some of those policy asks to make these new technologies a reality sooner rather than later. So that's the UK, and then an announcement that took place just 2 weeks ago. And this is really significant for us because it's the first global aviation body that have announced a commitment to net zero emissions. So this is the One World Alliance. So 13 carriers. It's the result of 12 months of negotiations, but yeah, very happy to be part of an announcement of this global body making that commitment. And importantly, it does include airlines from all over the world. So the United States, from Russia, from China. So a truly global commitment. And our hope is that this will support work across the industry to get a broader industry commitment to this very important target. And then just finally, in recognition of, I guess, the work that's happening at IAG, we were very pleased to receive this award just last Friday. So this is for our strategy on flight path net zero. I have to say it's very unusual for airlines to earn environment awards. So this was very pleasing for us, and hopefully it'll demonstrate to other organisations that that they can do the same. So that said, thank you very much. That was a quick overview. Just in conclusion, I'll just say these final points before we go to the Q&A. Hopefully I've demonstrated that we can move to a sustainable airline industry, that there is a pathway to reduce our emissions. The absolute key is to achieve that through collaboration, as it's an industry challenge. We recognise that regulation plays an important role, but it's appropriate regulation, and we need to avoid taxation. Our view is that we accept market-based measures, but taxation is really not the right instrument because it doesn't address the environment issue. So thank you very much for your attention, and look forward to taking any of your questions. So William, back to you.
So we have received so many questions, which some of them has already been published.
There are actually, so many questions. Thank you for thank you for contributing. I'll try to extract a variety of them. But first of all, congratulations on that award. As you say, we don't hear airlines receiving environmental awards. So well done. I mean, I think it's been a fascinating overview of a variety of sustainability-driven initiatives within IAG, and I think it is particularly reassuring to hear that, I guess, despite all the challenges that COVID is bringing, the industry, airlines, IAG remains committed to fulfilling climate change targets. I think that is a reassuring and encouraging message. The fact that again you are willing to work with governments, with other stakeholders, so that we maximize opportunities for a speedy recovery. But at the same time, I think it's good to hear that you're not willing to do that and in the process compromise the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. That's really a very, very positive message. I've got, as I said, quite a lot of questions here, so I'm just going to select a few of them. The first question says that what is the impact of the possible deferring of new aircraft deliveries across the group as a result of the COVID crisis on achieving the 2025 targets?
Yes, no, thank you for the question, and yeah, that's very relevant. So as you know, we publicly stated that IAG, we've retired our 747 fleet and also the A340 fleet. But we will continue. We're continuing the commissioning of new aircraft, so the 787s and the A350s into the fleet. So our analysis has shown that we are very confident that we will still be able to meet that 2025 target of 80 grams of CO2 per passenger kilometre. The key will be the speed of the recovery, because not only is it the aircraft that you fly, but it's the load factors that you experience. And the latest IATA forecast is that this recovery programme will probably take 3 to 4 years. Anybody that's interested, they produced a very good series of presentations updating on the impacts of COVID and the recovery trajectory, and they're available on the IATA website. So yes, but so 3 to 4 years we expect to be back at the traffic levels that we enjoyed in 2019, and that means we'll experience the load factors that will enable us to achieve that 80 grams of CO2 per passenger kilometre. So we still hold to that commitment. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Another question says biofuels didn't feature in net emissions reductions. So does that mean that they will continue to be just a minor player environmentally?
No, we think biofuels will in up to 2030. I mean, the whole biofuel it is a significant challenge because essentially we're starting a new industry. We're having to build new refineries. So there is always a lead time in doing that. The amount of capital investment is very significant. So we think it will be a shallow trajectory for those first few plants. And the key is to get those first few plants built, prove that they're successful. And then once that happens, then we expect the pace of construction to accelerate. So that's why by 2030 here in the UK, we expect between 3 and 5 plants. By 2035, we expect that to go to 14, and then by 2050, you'll be over 50 plants. So it is a careful trajectory, if you like, to get to that longer term position. So that's for the UK, and we've been quite clear that 30% is about production of sustainable aviation fuels here in the UK. Globally, it could, and there will be a report coming out in a couple of weeks, produced by, in fact, next week by the Air Transport Action Group, that will look at the global picture for sustainable aviation fuels. And actually, the picture there is it's larger than we're looking at here for the UK, because there are many other pathways that you could access globally than here in the UK. So I would look out for that next week, and you'll see what the trajectories look like on a global level.
Thank you. Yes, on a related question here, it says, are sustainable aviation fuels a realistic and economic prospect, given the challenges of land resource and other growing demands on energy and electricity?
Sure, and we know, we've learned, everybody, not just aviation, everybody in the biofuel area has recognised the lessons learned from first generation biofuels. So we're absolutely clear as an industry that we will only use truly sustainable fuels. And so the land use issue is first and foremost when we talk about sustainability. So you get this sort of technical term called indirect land use change. And we're very clear that our sustainability criteria for any of the fuels that we choose will avoid any of those land use issues. There are already 7 pathways that have been approved across the sector that could be used by the aviation sector, and there's another half a dozen in the pipeline. So, and all of those are fuels that avoid all of those land use change issues, the food versus fuel debate, if you like. Those sustainability criteria, they will be established by our global regulator, ICAO. So we're absolutely clear as an industry, we will only use the most sustainable fuels, and there are more than enough fuels, materials and raw material, feedstocks that will meet the demands of the industry. The challenge is actually making them commercially viable. And so that's the area that we're working on as a sector. So to get these first few plants built, the challenge is making sure that we've got appropriate regulatory support, which is why we're very much focused on getting that government support here in the UK.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, very interesting. There's another question again related. This is from Bill Tyack. He asks, what about hydrogen as an alternative fuel?
Yes, and we've heard lots about hydrogen in the last two years, and I don't know if anybody's had a chance to see it, but Airbus made a very interesting announcement on Monday. So they're looking to produce the first concept hydrogen aircraft by 2035. We think hydrogen is the overall picture for aviation is there's no silver bullet. There's no one technology, as you've seen from the various charts, that's going to help us meet our climate change targets. So we need everything. But we absolutely believe that hydrogen has a role to play there. Now, there are a few things to consider there. The hydrogen has to be able to be produced sustainably. So there are different sources of hydrogen, some are less or more sustainable, so that's absolutely key. And we think that carbon capture technology will be a key part of that. The other issue is that it's expensive. Currently, it's very expensive, so clearly it will need to be commercially viable. And also, really for us, I think we don't believe, and I think the manufacturers will agree with this, it's a solution for long-haul flights. If you look at the volumetric challenges you have with hydrogen, and I think Airbus sort of confirmed this on Monday, that we're really looking at short-haul, narrow-body aircraft. But no, that represents a significant amount of flying. So our view is, yes, hydrogen will have a part to play, but it'll probably be on those short-haul, narrow-body on the routings. But the exciting thing about hydrogen, it is truly zero carbon. There's no CO2 at all produced from it, only lots of water. So I think it will have an important part to play in our overall decarbonisation.
Thank you, Jonathon. On a slightly different topic, but again, by the number of likes, this is another question that many of our attendees are interested in. So what is the government doing about airspace structure? Because at the moment, it just seems like an idea, but no action. The airspace is very dated, and this structure has been in place since the 50s. It wasn't designed to accommodate this many aircrafts and the future expansion predicted. If it is not dealt with soon, the amount of fuel waste will just increase as more aircraft are told to hold. There is no question here, but there is definitely a question behind this statement.
Yes, and I know we all recognise that, and absolutely, it's like driving cars on a 50s road network here in the UK, no motorways or anything. So no, I think everybody understands that this is a big issue and it needs to be addressed. And in various consultations, the government recognised that, and and there is a lot of industry lobbying to achieve this sooner rather than later. And I know that the UK government will be running a net zero aviation consultation later in the year, and we expect that airspace modernisation will be a key part of that. So yeah, it has to play a key part of our future decarbonisation strategy. Yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan. Another question from Bruce Elliott. Thanks very much for this excellent presentation, Jonathan. Can I ask what is IAG's position on radioactive forcing caused by other greenhouse gas warming effects of emission at altitude from things like contrails or chutes, non-CO2s, etc. So traditionally, the aviation sector has ignored all these effects due to, I guess, uncertainty, but a recent paper has probably settled the debate and suggests that current carbon calcs used are out of by a factor of 3. So will IAG start accounting for these effects?
Yeah, no, we've done a lot of work. We work very closely with the academic community and DLR in Germany, and also the Royal Aeronautical Society Greener by Design Group are very active looking at this whole issue of non-CO2. And in fact, just last week there was a webinar run by Sustainable Aviation on this issue, where we introduced my understanding the papers will be available on the Sustainable Aviation website. We've got the latest academic report. So if you're interested, David Lee from Manchester Metropolitan University has just issued a paper on this. And for us, it's clear there is a non-CO2 effect. What we need to understand is get some certainty around what that effect is before we can take policy moves or introduce mitigation measures. And it is clear that probably the biggest single effect is cirrus-induced contrails. Yeah. So now. It is a complex issue because cirrus clouds, they have a warming and a cooling effect. So if they're during the daytime, they generally have a cooling effect because they reflect sunlight. So whereas at night time, it's certainly there is a warming effect as they trap infrared heat. So one of the things we need to understand is how can we predict where those contrails can be formed, and are there relatively straightforward operational measures that we can take to avoid those, if you like, those atmospheric conditions to avoid the formation of those contrails. So we're actively involved in that, and there was a program called IAGOS, which is a global scheme where we attach monitoring equipment on the side of our aircraft to help understand those effects, and we've been a part of that through Iberia. So we've had equipment attached to one of our A340s, actively supporting the research to understand this. It's fair to say that at this point in time, and this was sort of reinforced by one of the academics from Reading University, that from a tech readiness level, we're probably at TRL 3 in truly understanding what those effects are, and that we need to get to TRL 8 or 9 before we actually run trials to understand this issue. So we'll work with the community to try and get there as quick as we can, but we fully accept we need to take action to avoid these non-CO2 effects. One bright piece of news in this area is sustainable aviation fuels. So it's clear that contrails are formed by the nuclei that come out of fossil-based jet fuel. Now, sustainable aviation fuels, because they're synthetically produced, they don't have these nuclei, particularly as you can get closer to 100% blends. So, there could be another significant benefit of deploying these fuels, that they also avoid the formation of contrails. But yeah, it is something that we're focused on, and please do take a look at the Sustainable Aviation website for the latest information in this area.
Thank you, Jonathan. We keep receiving many questions. So again, I'm going to select questions that are sort of different from what we've touched on. So this is one from Kirsty. She's asking, is there a plan to reduce carbon emissions from the use of ground vehicles within the airport operation? So will IAG be looking at using only electric vehicles for all airlines to significantly reduce CO2 emissions on the ground?
Yes, yeah, no, it's a very good question. Thank you. And yeah, we look at all our CO2 emissions. So without getting too technical, we have the sort of what they call scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. So scope 1 is emissions from our flying. Scope 2 would include those ground vehicle emissions and from our buildings, and then scope 3 is the emissions from our suppliers, if you like, in production of jet fuel and aircraft. So no, very focused, and we have targets on reducing our scope to our ground emissions, if you like, and from our buildings. And we already had a significant number of electric vehicles at Heathrow, and there is a continuous plan to replace those with more environmentally friendly aircraft, be they hydrogen. So there's an opportunity not just for electric vehicles, but also for hydrogen-based vehicles. So we have targeted reducing those vehicles, those emissions in line with our overall climate change ambitions. So yeah, we look at every ton of CO2.
Thank you. Again, a slightly different topic, but also quite important. I'm just going to read the message as it came. So, hello, Jonathan. When we talk about baskets of measures, it's always ATMs, market-based measures, operational efficiencies. These are very important, but they are led top-down by the industry and the government. How important do you think are consumer and societal behavioral changes? So, a bottom-up approach. Should airlines share information on the carbon footprint of their flights in relatable terms to consumers? I think, again, COVID has brought about significant behavioral changes, right? So I think it is a very pertinent question.
Yes, and no, we've seen massive demand from our customers to understand what are we doing to address our carbon emissions. Always challenging on a flight-by-flight basis because depends on the aircraft, type of aircraft, depends on the load factor. So at a very granular level, it becomes challenging to get an accurate picture. But what I would say to anybody that is flying, is concerned about their emissions, is to really look at what the airline is doing. And the first point was, have they committed to reducing their carbon emissions? So I would the key to addressing this problem, it is a long-term problem, as you see. All this investment we need to make in these new technologies, and it is those companies that commit to making those investments that are going to make the biggest difference. So you can look at aircraft fleet plans and how committed are they, which is that carbon efficiency target. So that's important, but also strategically, what are they doing longer term to really address this problem? And I would say go to airlines websites, take a look at what they're doing, to make a true difference in this enormous challenge that we have.
Good. Another interesting question here. Do you find yourselves partnering, or the need for partnering with your airline competitors or suppliers to improve customer perception of the sustainability impact or improvements of the aviation industry? Again, you've talked about the importance of creating these initiatives, but around partnerships is not something that can be dealt in isolation. So this question is around that.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, and we recognise IAG won't solve aviation's climate change problem. We need to work as an industry, and that was what led us to work with sustainable aviation, but particularly with our airline partners. We work with the One World. The One World initiative was very much around, while we compete on many routes, and we're part of the same alliance, but we're still competitors. We recognise that climate change is a huge industry challenge, which is why it was great. It was fantastic, I think, for us to be able to announce net zero emissions as an alliance. So that's 13 carriers, globally committing to this target. And our full hope is that other alliances and other parts of the industry will begin to follow. Because once we have an industry commitment, then we can start to influence the global regulators. Because the end game for us is getting appropriate policy from governments to help us make all these investments in these new technologies, and if we can do that globally, it will happen, deeper and faster. So yeah, it is something. We also, our industry association IATA, are very active in this space. They have a fantastic team that, and IATA recognises that climate change is one of the major strategic challenges for our industry. So IATA are also very active and progressive in this area. So it is something that we have to work together on.
Good. Another question, again, as a different aspect of this. Do you envisage outreach activities for young people to educate them about the importance of sustainable aviation? I think, again, there is a clear demand from the young people, university students, to really learn more about sustainable aviation. So what is, within sort of these corporate social responsibility activities that British Airways is engaged with, what are they specifically aimed at sustainable aviation?
Yeah, absolutely, indeed. And in fact, most of the interest that we get, both within our organisation, is from our new joiners. It's one of the first questions, and in fact, our recruiters are saying that when they go to the universities and the schools, one of the first question they get asked is, what are you doing on sustainability? So recognizing that this is becoming a very important issue. I know Royal Aeronautical Society, they have a young members group as well, where we're very active in helping provide information, recognizing there's big demand there. And there are other organizations as well. I know the Air League are very active in this area, and it's something we'll be working closely with to help provide more information around, and because we don't want to be seen as an industry that young people don't find attractive for future careers. And the key question for them is, do we take this issue responsibly, and are we going to be sustainable? So we recognise it's very important to attract the future talent to help our industry grow.
Yes, definitely. I think we've seen that younger airline customers are increasingly more and more concerned around issues, climate change. There's been a lot of research on that, so very interesting and very important that airlines also recognize this. A different question says, thank you, Jonathon, for a great lecture. 2 questions, if I may. 1, what ways can IAG Cargo reduce their overall emissions as most, if not all, freight from aircraft to customer are transported by lorries rather than by rail? And the second one, it says, with the distribution of vaccines being launched in the next few months, how can the overall aviation industry ensure mass distribution of vaccines without releasing extra emissions through the likely need of freighter aircraft?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and it's something again we're very focused on. So you may be aware that in BA we don't have any freighter aircraft, so the freight sits within the belly hold of our aircraft, and that helps push up the carbon efficiency significantly, because from us we see it as more efficient. You're already flying with those passengers, so if you can increase that payload with cargo. The ground transport issue is a significant one. As you say, a lot of that cargo is trucked. But the original sort of concept was that trucks will be using fossil fuels, but I've seen advances now in technology where we are now looking at hybrid electric trucks and potentially hydrogen powered trucks. So as well as the opportunity to use those in aircraft, I think there are even earlier opportunities to move trucks towards some of that sustainable technology. So that's something we'll be very interested in. As I say, it's all part of our emissions. We monitor all of those emissions. So as part of our disclosure, we look at our end-to-end emissions, not just those in the flying. So we'll be focused on making sure that we've got policies and investing in technology to make sure we reduce that end-to-end emissions profile.
Good, thank you. Another question, this is from Anil Patra. He asks, aircraft noise continues to be an issue close to airports. So what is the IAG strategy to reduce noise?
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. I mean, lots of focus on climate change, but we haven't forgotten the noise issue. And, so we have targets on noise. So our target is to reduce our noise per flight by 10% between now and 2025. So that's one of our key, if you like, sustainability KPIs. And the good news is that new aircraft are the noise performance is even better. Improvement is even better than their carbon performance. So the new generation of aircraft are significantly up 40% quieter than the aircraft they replace. So that's going to have a significant difference. And particularly when we look at the 787 Dreamliners and the A350s, it's incredible how much quieter they are. And I think, while we all love the 747, we all probably grew up flying on 747s. They were the noisiest aircraft by quite a big factor here in the UK, and of course they won't be flying anymore. So that alone will have a significant difference. And just to give you sort of order of magnitude, the scheme that we use to measure noise, it's called a QC scheme. I don't want to get too technical, but a takeoff and landing of a 747 at a QC of 6, our latest modern aircraft, that is near a 1.5. So overall noise impact of our more modern aircraft is 1/4 of that of the 747s. So there will be a significant benefit of no longer flying those aircraft. But the next generation of so it's going to make a huge difference.
Thank you, Jonathon. Another different question this time. It's a very interesting question. It says, how does sustainability play a role in airline profits and as such investor relations? Again, we've seen investors that are increasingly concerned about the effects of climate risk on airline valuations. In fact, climate related financial disclosures are becoming more and more common. Can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, no, and this is an absolutely critical area, as I showed in my first chart. In fact, probably the biggest increase in interest from our stakeholders is from our investors. So here at IAG, I just sit across the corridor from our investor relations team, and I spend as much time talking to them as I do to my boss, because they get daily inquiries around what is IAG doing about sustainability. And it's absolutely clear they're getting pressure from their customers. They don't want to be investing in companies that are not taking this issue seriously. So our view is it will become a point of differentiation between companies, those that are taking this seriously and those that are not. So it's really important from a cost of capital point of view, and also investability in your company. You have to take this issue seriously. So yeah, it's critically important.
Good, thank you. Yeah, I think this idea of a triple bottom line is becoming increasingly relevant. So on a similar note, this question from Stuart: while IAG is clearly committed to reducing its environmental impacts, what action is IAG taking to address the social impact elements of sustainability, e.g. well-being in the workplace, purpose, governance, local community support? Yeah.
Yes, and that's I can refer you to the sustainability section of our annual report. So when I started producing these back in 2015, they're about 8 pages long. I think it's up to 40, and you'll see that the biggest, and so environment has always been a big issue, but as you say, the biggest increase has been on the social and community measures. So so we have more than tripled the number of KPIs we have in sort of workforce related issues. And so, this is something that is rising up the agenda. There's a lot of workforce, government-led and industry-led workforces are looking at how can airlines and companies provide better disclosure in terms of what they're doing for their workforce. So I'd refer you to, I think I'm right in saying we have now over 25 measures that are looking at the social and community impact of our business. So, and my view is it's something that's only going to increase in importance.
Okay, I don't know how much more time we have. Perhaps 2 more questions, and I think that will probably be, we have to wrap it up. So one interesting question, again, completely unrelated to what we've been talking about: does Brexit affect UK operators to join EU ETS?
So you'll have seen, yes, it does. So the UK launched a consultation last year, recognising the fact that it's most likely that we will not be part of the EU emissions trading scheme. So they are going to implement a UK emissions trading scheme that we will be part of. But the intention is it will replicate as many of the factors, the characteristics of the EU emissions trading scheme as far as possible. So what we're looking for through that is almost a seamless scheme that integrates fully with the EU emissions trading scheme. Now, and our view is the emissions trading scheme has been a real success. It has resulted in tens of millions of tons of reduction in CO2 in the aviation industry since we're a part of it, since 2012. Longer term, our view is that we need a global scheme. Corsia is the right scheme for that. It is the only scheme that will address all of global emissions. So in time, we recognise that we need to migrate all of these various sort of national and regional schemes into this one global scheme. So that's our long-term, and by that way, that will by far and away be the most effective way that the global industry can meet its long-term targets.
Good. So I guess the last question probably is the one that we all want to have an answer to, because I think that's really the one that's going to make a difference. This is from Rob Govins. Thanks for the thorough presentations. How long will it be before the Shell Vilosis plant in Humberside will be producing sustainable fuel?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And our current timelines are that we will look to start construction at the back end of 2021, early 2022. It's a fairly compact facility, so we're looking at producing fuel from 2024.
Perfect. Thank you. I think a very clear answer. Again, I think that's all we really have time for. Thank you very much, Jonathon. I think, again, a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of experience. We are really privileged to have you as our president. Again, thank you for all the support that you give to the Heathrow branch, and thank you again for sharing all this with our branch. Perhaps I'll just pass over to William. He can give people information around where you can get recorded of this session. And I think that's all from me. I think again, thank you very much for participating, Jonathon, but everybody else as well. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for all your questions. Very excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Jonathon. I would like to voice my thanks on behalf of the chair, Peter Fryer, who is also listening in on today's webinar, as well as many of the society staff who is also listening in and supporting us all the way through. So, ladies and gentlemen, today's webinar is coming towards an end. And as you know, this webinar is being live recorded, and we will make this recording available on our podcast and YouTube channel. Please join us on social media channel on Twitter, Facebook group, LinkedIn group, or YouTube by searching RAeS Heathrow Branch on the above channels, or visit our website, aerosociety.com/Heathrow to receive latest information and our upcoming events. Thank you all for joining us today, and goodbye.
From across the globe, from the centre of aerospace, and now to you.
Thank you for downloading from the Royal Aeronautical Society. If you enjoyed this content, please consider showing your support for the Society. Share a link to this presentation by email or on your favourite social networks. If you have an interest in aerospace, consider the professional and personal benefits of membership. Visit www.aerosociety.com.